more savings, but this is a conservative budget, and we're trying to show, you know, a kind of a worst case.
So you were talking about the grant. Has it been confirmed that we at least get the $60,000?
Yes, we've got that in writing from the CP.
For enrollment, I don't even know if it's worth asking. A lot of the undecideds are waiting to hear back from other schools. When do the other schools typically make those decisions?
It's a good question. There's a couple key things. The ones who are we're looking at other charter schools, they're now in the post-lottery phase of making determinations, and they should have doing that and are in a permit situation. So permits, it varies by district. So districts accept in August, and sometimes they'll wait until literally day 2 of school, and then they see what their resident population is, and then they'll say, okay, we can open up this many seats and move on from there. So it's there's no
magic. Do we know when LUSD does it?
Well, most of our families are not permitting into LAUSD. They're permitting out of LAUSD into a smaller district. And so
how many undecideds do we have?
It was Casey?
I have a question kind of with a similar obvious cost for different numbers of teachers. If having just a one classroom model, given our enrollment numbers, what other areas we could expect some savings in if we didn't have 2 core teachers for
I think we could look at savings in textbook. It's also whether or not you do an 8-year full thing or whether you do a 1-year pilot, and that'll be a discussion with the textbook committee, selection committee.
So other than just the core teachers that you like read, so there's the obvious cost of 1 versus 2.
Another big one would be Chromebooks, and whether how many to purchase, because they're a single cost item. That may be one of those that it's worth just making the purchase now and having. Again, that was one of the things that is specifically listed in the grant. An area. So those kind of things, classroom furniture, there might be a little less, you know, depending. So for a very small number of kids.
One last question kind of along that track, regardless of whether we're doing 2 classrooms, but the exploratory, if we have a very small number of kids, do the numbers here change at all if it's everyone is doing the same class at the same time?
Yeah, but that one is reflected in this budget.
Okay.
That's already in there. Okay. So in other words, that was the question that he had, which is 25,000 or 50,000.
Okay.
And I think that the magic number on that is about 30. We cross over that number for an exploratory class. It's divided in a different way.
I don't know if I can ask this question if it's still on topic, but I was wondering where the 2 classrooms are. Are they close to each other? Do we know this yet? Like physically on the campus? Oh, okay.
It's the official office.
Hypothetically speaking, if we turned out to have a very low number of students, is there a possibility to use one of the rooms that we're getting as a classroom and one of the rooms as something closer to one classroom? Or would having 2 classrooms?
I'm in a deferred classroom placement.
We decided depending on what the offer is.
Okay.
It's budgetary moving of where it's coming from, but have we actually,
We have spent
other than the IB candidacy?
We did IB camp. We haven't gone to it yet, but we've paid for professional development training. At this point, it's about the extent.
If you could just add a column that has the actual spent so far, that way it's clear that, you know, we started trending through it, that'd be great. All right, Biggie. Do you have anything else? Scott?
Probably because there's not going to be as large classes to expand them to be one of the full-time teachers. And then it might not be so hard to find a teacher to fill that position, and we would, kind of be saving there. Instead of paying for a full-time and a half, we would just pay for a half, or for, you see what I'm saying?
In other words, you'd be hiring a teacher who's able to teach Spanish or able to teach language, or
In addition
German,
to-
in addition to core classes, and that would become one of their,
Yeah, one of
now,
the-
we would also need to look at, yes, that is a
Credentialing.
possibility, and it is, but we'd also need to look at when their prep time would be, because there's prep, but it could be switched out potentially with exploratory, but we'd have to figure out how we're covering credentialing on that.
Yeah.
So,
Because if it's just one class that they're combining into exploratory, you could share the teacher supervision time, and then they would have at least half of that time for prep too.
yes, in a larger, in the larger number scenario,
Right.
I agree, that's a possibility.
Okay, I have nothing further. Let's move on to the hiring process.
Admittedly thought about, it makes more sense to consider this as people have been hired. But it has not necessarily been a written process, and so we spent some time, process is set up, and so either replacing a position or it's specifically a new position, but you need to process. The administrative leadership team is the three divisions are certificated or teacher positions fall under the principal. The assistant principal classified fall under the director of operations. And so from there, that person is the point person, and they figure out that's done through the director of operations. They develop a panel to do the lead the process with the ALT of applicant screen. The interviews are then the interview for specialists that we draw in for one reason or another. We talked about what the interview protocol was. Interviews on a consistent length from candidate to candidate. The protocols in bullets here with following up on reference checks that we typically make 3 reference checks, but securing at least 2. And then there can be a follow-up session, which would include, it might be a demo lesson or a different set of questions, and that's where once it's determined and the candidate is accepted, then the candidate is turned over to the director of operations for processing as employed. So, any questions?
Things that I would write a little differently, but the content, yes, correct.
Hiring process for the school in general, or just for now? Then I would add a section about Skype interview.
Laura?
I wondered if we had to decide on a second person, if that.
I think somewhere in here it does list that it does
If you
mention that we do
rank
rank ordering,
Mm-hmm.
so it would fall past experience.
I think it would be good to have one. There hasn't been an issue in anything I've been involved with, people not getting back to me.
Casey? We lead selecting an interview team, a number of people, no more than 5. So I would little.
My concern is when we're doing grade level hiring, then that might get 4 to 5. So if we're doing, I don't want one.
Is that sufficient?
Are we talking about TK through 6 or 6?
Just everybody.
in general.
Yeah. Is that sufficient?
Yeah,
Not
I
to
think
exceed
no more
five.
than 5 would be.
And
I don't know. You tell me. You guys tell me.
And I guess I have a question as a committee, is the committee making a recommendation to the lead, quote, voting? And let me explain the reasoning I bring that up is the lead is, these things are set up so that the lead is the one who is responsible moving forward. So in other words, the lead is responsible for not just hiring, but firing, if that were the case. And that's where the typical scenario where, say, a principal is that the committee is making a recommendation to the lead, but the lead does have the final say on putting it forward to the board.
When you say committee, do you mean the interview panel?
The interview panel, I shouldn't say
Okay.
committee, yeah, you're right.
Okay, so a couple of things about that, because when you say there's an initial screening that'll determine 4 to 8 applicants that will then be interviewed by the panel, who is specifically responsible for that initial screening? It's a little, I feel like it's a little ambiguous where it's the lead and teacher specialists or grade level teams may also participate, okay? Because in my experience, I would take a group of candidates that I would personally screen, and then no matter what, I'd get who I wanted. Does that make sense? Sorry.
It does make sense.
Well, it's a public meeting. But
What's on record?
but that's not necessarily, I mean, it depends on the organization, so it depends on the kind of organization you want. So the other approach is you can have a specific group that is always in charge of initial interview screening, okay, which is what some organizations do, and they're always responsible for it, and they go everything based on job description. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, job description and resume and credentials, things like that. So they will then always give you who they think is matching or who they don't feel is matching. That's another way to do it, and then the lead still determines, you know, who is in the panel, and then they vote. To answer your question, the question you asked is more about once you actually get to the hiring. You know, that being said, you have the option of, if the lead and the panel agree, that's great. But if they don't, then I feel like their boss should step in and say, "This is what my decision is," and then that stands. So that's my 2 cents. And we'll do another round, but furthermore, you're not clear on how many rounds of interviews may be required. So that is a little ambiguous, but which we can discuss if there are more than 2 or 3 rounds. But I open it up to who was the last person hired here at the school
On this
in this committee. There's a lot of what's sort of happened and a mesh of how to move forward, I imagine, right? To
Yeah.
a certain extent. So Scott, what's your feedback on how it went before?
Well, before that, in my previous experience, I'm a big fan of the lead, and it'll be more work for us. But doing the screen,
So
in
the
my
lead would do
experience,
that. The lead would do a phone screen.
that's my input.
Yeah.
In my experience, you can screen out a lot of people by asking 2 or 3 questions before we even waste anyone's time. My experience here was, as an interviewee, pleasant. I was reached out to. I came for an initial interview with Casey and Dr. Williams, and then there was a long wait time, which was the only thing that wasn't good about the experience. You know, assistant principalship maybe is a little bit different than another position. And then there was a second interview with a panel that included many staff. So it was a 2-interview process.
But it was first led by the lead, or leads in
Yeah.
this case,
And
and
then
then
it
the
was brought
panel
to-
for a second, and then most likely went to a vote and
Yeah.
decision was made.
And that's for an administrative position. For a teaching position, it may be a little bit different.
Okay.
That was my experience.
All right. So, Biggie.
Might be a difference between a an administrative position higher up or a, teacher position, how many. However, I definitely think it should be multiple people. I like the idea, that makes sense and can give a good idea, that's about it.
I would add, you know,
Okay.
so I would add that paper screen and then a phone screen.
So,
When you do the paper screen, do you also check for reference at that point?
Usually, and anyone can speak, but only do reference checks after the fact.
I like the idea of the phone screen because I think in the past we had people who applied for a job who had joined, and then once we invited them for an interview, they realized that they were really far away from where they live. So I think you can kind of like read those applications out through a phone screen and just make sure that this is something that you discuss because that would be great.
yeah.
I agree, phone screen is a good idea, and I think I like the idea of having grade level teachers in on the decision because it makes the teachers feel valued, just being able to have a say, and because of how closely teachers have to work here, it's very important not to just have, these are the people that always decide who works here.
Can I add something? Last year or this past summer, we actually had a lot of interviews during the summer. So if in order to have teachers in the panel, there should be some kind of compensation in there because teachers came in during their summer break where they were not on payroll.
I agree with phone screening. I also agree that the more we can firm up the language and be as specific as possible, the better, because when I first stepped into starting to lead the process, there was a lot of open space for me to work in. So I think the clearer we can be, the better it will be long term for the school.
So I think the overall comments were we add a phone screen that's done by the lead, and the lead phone or Skype, phone/Skype. And and then the lead then determines the top candidates to be interviewed by a panel not to exceed 5. And I think that falls in line with Scott, what you said, because ultimately this is the lead's employee and they're the ones responsible for them, so they should provide the top candidates that come in. Okay. The last thing is to Scott's comment, should we have something that says, you know, first and second rounds will be conducted within, each round will be conducted within 2 weeks, not to exceed 2 weeks. Because I think that also helps the candidates know and the lead can say, look, our rounds are, I think 2 weeks, that gives everyone enough time. Alright, so anything else, Vicky? Should we do another round or we good?
The only thing that I'd like to, for all of us to be aware is the fact that we don't always have this many applicants. So there are positions where we have 1 applicant, and some of the positions are posted a week before we need the applicant to step in, or even less than that. So to go through all this and make it very matter of fact, this needs to be done, might change when there are not that many applicants or when there is a lot of time pressure, what we've had before. So we just need to be aware of the fact that we might not always be able to follow the whole process.
Could we maybe put in an accelerated timeline it may be needed in cases of, emergency cases, or better language than that.
I mean, we've had teachers that came to the orientation on Friday and didn't show up on Tuesday for the first day of work. So that makes things like that a little impossible.
Just to clarify, the whole interview with the German teacher is going to be on Skype. Like if we interview a German teacher in Germany, they're not flying here for an interview. So to say it's a, they could, to say it's a phone/Skype, first initial, interview, like the whole interview process is
Always on Skype.
on Skype.
Yeah, I would say just not do a phone interview, just always do a Skype interview for anybody, like the first one. And that's what I do.
Are you saying Skype every single candidate?
No, just.
Yes, he says, if I understand
Anybody.
correctly, so
Yeah.
the first screening
Screen is
will
a
always
Skype.
be a
Yeah,
Skype,
Skype.
not
And then for
a
the German
phone call.
teacher, it'll.
For screening to be on Skype, it's much easier questions like that. I don't need to like,
Or I have another thing to add,
Yeah.
we choose one who would be locally, and we need to start this process in January.
International candidates, the anticipated start date.
It can't be coming from
Yeah.
So we can just offer the wording should be.
And
Makes a good point though, like fill the position when someone quits, maybe you just has to.
the management can do whatever they want.
just get
At
it
least the risk right away to take some general frame, and then they book it, right?
pool that's very optimistic. It's a little.
Pool, used to 2 or 3 people. If you have, until you see.
I'd like to make a motion to.
So we
Why
could
are we
meet
even
one more
approving
time.
it?
That hey, since there's nothing.
Eligibility for the position, we did have one candidate for the Russian and German are the 2 that are most, and moving from them. Casey's the lead.
Candidate scheduling interviews.
Well, I guess we're just following, it will be because looking at the budget, we'll have to decide, that we have home aid, we have done this before, and therefore we, Spanish, because since they didn't,
Really coming in does.
might be one person who
The fiscal impact is gonna.
Eventually, because to teach a standalone German, which is a massive.
Just have a middle school option to have her teach the eighth grade and how that's taught.
teachers first come here, they don't have to get, emergency.
Have a certain amount of units on a digital basis.
Our German teachers qualify to do the extra coursework just because you have the language proficiency.
There's nothing else.
Abbreviated process, extremely abbreviated process. Out essentially, provision were not. So as such, we list cost at 32 students. We apply for level that the teachers have. A tricky business. That's been interesting. And are the 3 teachers for rating the issues that we'll be discussing, and they need to have several other meetings, and down below it says after school meetings as needed for follow-up, and we'll determine that with the teachers, so there's not, you can't even talk to people because they haven't been using the materials yet. It's all just out there. So science is probably one that definitely suggests just doing a 1-year pilot, selecting one and saying, okay, we'll do this, we'll see how it goes. Spanish and German, I talked with Jennifer Cohen about the Spanish. She's actually taking home some materials, and then we're going to meet on off times to look at the Spanish. There are 2 different Spanish books we're looking at. And then the German, we're using the recommendation that came from looking at the language coordinator, and we're using the single one that we've selected. So the German one is pretty well is pretty well set. We want to have recommendations finalized across the board by the end of the month, so that we can purchase materials in June.
Peggy?
I don't feel like, I mean, I've had 2 children go through the process, and that book is a very specific, goes through in 1 year. Those students will be bored out of their minds and will not wanna do German anymore. So I think that there will need to be a good, amount of other resources that might not need to be books, could be things that you get out of newspapers, could be whatever, but other resources than just that one book, because that's really geared to prepare for the test, not guide a normal language arts lesson. If I'm remembering correctly what was on that list. For everything else, I can't say what books would be better or not as good. I'm happy to look at things if that helps, just as an outsider kind of, not as someone who's an educator, but someone who has children at that age and hears what they say and sees what they learn and do in an IB school. So I can do that, but I think the major work would need to come from that, from the selection committees.
Scott? Sorry?
I agree with Dee. I think we had the discussion that the material for German that was in the material revision is not adequate to teach students for 3 years. It's a preparation for a very specific test, and I remember talking about maybe using just a regular German language arts curriculum for maybe a grade lower, maybe for grade 5, that would be worked in a German classroom in grade 5. Nothing that is German as a foreign language, but just a regular German material, that preparation of the B1 in 8th grade, then maybe resort to using the resource to prepare the kids for the test.
Casey?
No, I just wanted to add that on both of those days, Scott and I are.
Alright. I have nothing else, so.
One thing, I'll be at a German conference the weekend of Memorial Day, and they said that they would also have German publishing houses there, so I will see if I can get some materials.
Would we have enough time if we put off the German resources to when curriculum writing would happen right after school gets out?
That was the other thing I was going to say, ordering in mid-June might make things really tight. Usually our order for materials goes out in late May, because the contractors that are specialized in international shipping, they ship to international schools all over the world. It just got stuck in customs for 4 weeks. So there's always an adventure. And then the other thing is, in past years, a way to pay the contractors with a credit card.
Well, we're talking about, I would say a handful, about 5 students, and they will not have thick, big books that we need. For 5 books, we need to go through all sorts of publishers, and 5 books that are this big, I'll put them in my big books, so that's not a big deal. Grade levels, so that, I think from a timeline standpoint, I think we should be able to use what you can, and within Germany, we should be able to get those materials quicker. It shouldn't be your personal credit card.
Okay. All right.
There's
no, I did it wrong.
Yeah.
I got
to create 4 job descriptions. These are, with the assumption of a double program, and so how it's listed out is for a semester, and we'd be doing this as a quarter. So now there's less than 30 kids, we'd be doing it as a quarter. So this would be posted on. This would be posted on EdJoin, and to see if we get somebody who says, hey, that's available. So this is, I think this is a bit of a long shot in terms of will we get someone, but you don't know if you don't ask, and I think that was the point of the committee last time. So any questions on the job descriptions? You want to take a second?
I know it's probably pretty standard, but I find it really fun. I don't know, I find the working conditions, the physical abilities, the standard.
Standard on, yeah, that's a standard. Very standard.
Scott?
Question, and not by any means a critique, Chris. These look exactly the same except for develop and implement a blank curriculum is the only other difference.
Right.
But otherwise,
Tailored for an exploratory.
Yeah.
And then the only difference is what is the focus of each exploratory area. Yes.
and then I'm colorblind, but is it blue?
Oh, yes,
It
blue.
is blue, yeah.
Which one?
They also have all this,
Oh.
this is highlighted in the
And
bottom disclaimer.
Oh, all of them, yeah.
And then at the bottom, we have our highlights in there as well. On the very bottom.